know that feeling, right? Brushing your teeth. It's just automatic, part of the morning routine.
Yeah, like breathing almost.
Exactly. Seems like it's been around forever.
But, okay, here's something wild.
Yeah.
There was actually a time, and not that long ago, when brushing your teeth every day wasn't really a thing for most people.
That's absolutely right. And welcome, everyone, to But Why, Though? This is our segment in Study Hall where we dig into the origins of stuff we take for granted. And today, we're getting into the story of how toothbrushing became so, well, normal in America, specifically between about 1890 and 1930. It's less about the brush itself and more about the push behind it.
And the main tool we're using to figure this out, advertising. We've dug up some really fascinating sources.
For sure.
We're talking analyses of old ads, what the advertisers themselves were thinking, and the inside scoop on one super successful campaign. This stuff isn't just about jingles. You know, it tells you a lot about society back then, what people cared about, what they worried about. Exactly. These ads are like little windows into the past. They show how advertising strategies were changing, but also, you know, how society was changing and how businesses were trying to, well, guide those changes sometimes.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How much of our daily routine might have roots in something like an old ad campaign?
Definitely. So as we get into this, here's something for you listening to chew on. What actually makes a new habit stick?
Right. What turns something strange into something you do without thinking? Let's dive in and see what we find.
Okay, so where do we start? A really big piece of the puzzle, according to our sources, is how advertisers, especially between 1890 and 1930, zeroed in on women.
Yeah, that makes sense. Back then, women were doing most of the household shopping, right? So if you wanted to sell something for the home...
You went straight to them. One advertising guy apparently called woman, pure and simple, the key target. She was the spender of the nation. Pretty blunt.
The spender of the nation. Wow, were they looking at anyone else? Or was it just all about women?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, the sources mostly hammer home the focus on women because they controlled, you know, the everyday household budget. Maybe for bigger ticket items like cars or something, men were more involved. But for toothpaste, soap, food, it was women.
Okay.
And this intense focus actually kicked off a big debate inside the advertising world. Like, how do you actually talk to these women? What works best?
Oh, so they weren't all on the same page. Interesting.
Not at all. You kind of had two main approaches fighting it out. One side figured women were mostly emotional, swayed by pretty pictures and feelings.
So appeal to the heart, not the head.
Kinda, yeah. One quote says, women were seen as more artistic, more influenced by sentiment, and cares more for details than men. So the ads should have nice illustrations, maybe some practical hints, but keep it light on the logic.
Okay, I can picture that. What was the other side saying?
They were the reason why, guys. They saw women as smart, busy shoppers. Shrewd, even. They believed women would respond to a solid argument, to facts, to self-interest.
More logical, then.
Yeah, one proponent argued that women actually enjoy sound reasoning, and they're willing to pay close attention to it and be convinced by it. So, you know, lay out the facts.
So who won? The emotional appeal or the logical argument?
Well, here's the funny thing. Even though they disagreed on why, they mostly agreed that the ads needed to be simple. Like, really simple.
Simple. Even the reason why, folks.
Avoid complex stuff, basically.
Yeah.
There was this pretty condescending idea floating around that the average woman's vocabulary was small.
Ouch.
And that intellectually they were maybe like a 14-year-old. Helen Woodward, who was actually a successful woman in advertising, even said women seldom buy anything through logical reasoning.
Wow. That's quite the take. And wasn't there something about army tests influencing this?
Right. After World War I, Army intelligence tests supposedly showed the average recruit had a 12-year-old mentality. Advertisers kind of latched onto that and applied it to the whole mass audience, which often meant, you know, women.
So some pretty outdated, maybe even insulting assumptions were baked into their strategies.
Definitely. And it led to this really weird contradiction in how women were portrayed.
How so?
Well, on one hand, ads would praise women for having this natural talent for shopping, like an inborn skill or a sixth sense for finding good value. They were the natural consumers.
Okay, so they're experts, born shoppers. Got it.
But then, in the next breath, other ads, or maybe even the same ones, would treat them like they were totally clueless.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they were virtually helpless in her work without advertising's education. Advertising was positioned as this necessary guide to help women fulfill their nature as shoppers.
Wait, so they're naturally gifted shoppers who need constant help from advertisers to shop. That makes no sense.
It's a total paradox, isn't it? Celebrated for this innate skill, yet treated like they need hand-holding.
That's bizarre. So how did they try to manage that? Did they change the language?
They did. They started talking about housework and shopping using, like, business jargon, male terms.
Oh, like what? Instead of cleaning, it was domestic resource management.
Huh. Almost. They used phrases like applying business methods and equipment to the home. Housework became the world's greatest business.
Seriously?
Oh, yeah. The home was the first factory. And the housewife. She wasn't just cooking and cleaning. She was the plant manager or the home executive.
A plant manager. Okay.
The whole idea was to make domestic work sound more important, more like the professional work men did. That way, selling products for the home felt more, legitimate, more serious.
So selling a vacuum cleaner wasn't just selling convenience, it was selling efficiency for the home executive.
You got it. But even with all this talk about women being in charge of buying, there was often this subtle message that, well, men were still really in charge behind the scenes.
How did that come across?
Well, even when they praised things like self-service stores, like Piggly Wiggly, which gave women more choice, the ads would hint that the real quality came from the able men running the company or manufacturing the goods. Like, women could pick, but men provided the good options to pick from.
Ah, okay. So female choice, but within a male-defined framework. Interesting. It makes you wonder what these ad guys really thought privately.
Yeah, and some sources suggest it wasn't always pretty. Behind closed doors, some apparently viewed women as, quote, inferiors in every conceivable standard knowledge, cultivation, aspirations.
Yikes. That's harsh.
Right.
So the public praise might have just been strategy, not genuine belief.
It certainly raises that question. And you can imagine, if you hold those kinds of views and you're a man who probably doesn't do much housework or shopping yourself, it must be hard to create ads that genuinely connect, right?
Absolutely. How do you sell something effectively if you don't really get the world of the person buying it?
Exactly. And that difficulty, that gap in understanding, actually pushed the industry to evolve. They realized they needed actual expertise.
Ah, is that where women started getting into the creative side of advertising? Like copywriters?
Precisely. Agencies like J. Walter Thompson started creating specific women's departments. They needed that inside perspective, people who actually understood women's lives, to make the ads resonate.
Makes sense. You need someone who actually uses the product or understands why someone would. Okay, let's maybe zoom out a bit. Advertising wasn't just selling soap and toothpaste, right? It was becoming a bigger cultural force during this time, 1880 to 1930 or so.
Oh, absolutely. It was becoming really central to American culture, working hand in glove with industrial capitalism. Advertisers didn't just see themselves as salespeople. They saw themselves as, like, architects of American identity.
Architects of identity. How so?
They were actively encouraging people to define themselves by what they owned, to buy things not just for need, but to, construct a certain image, a certain self. One source calls advertising the privileged discourse for the circulation of messages and social cues about the interplay between persons and objects.
Wow. So buy this car and you'll be successful, or use this soap and you'll be desirable, that kind of thing.
Exactly that. It's tying possessions directly to identity and status. Now, obviously, people have criticized advertising for promoting materialism or making people feel insecure.
Sure. That's a common critique even today.
Right. But the advertisers back then, they saw it very differently. They genuinely seemed to believe that more consumption led to more happiness for individuals and for the country as a whole.
Buying stuff was good for America.
In their view, absolutely. The consumer was king, or more often queen, making choices, buying things. That was being a good, free, modern American citizen. It fueled the economy.
So spending was almost patriotic.
That was definitely part of the narrative. And guys like Claude Hopkins, who we'll talk more about, really leaned into this. He basically said advertisers were like unseen rulers, sitting in their offices and swaying millions, deciding what people ate, how they decorated, everything.
She actually said that.
Oh, yeah. He even said a good advertising man comes pretty close to being an absolute czar.
An absolute czar. That's quite a statement. It sounds like they had a pretty high opinion of their own influence.
Extremely high.
Yeah.
And the agencies themselves were becoming much more than just ad writers. They were branching out.
What else were they doing?
They were creating brand names. Think about names like Onita Biscuit, Caro Syrup, Euban Coffee, Kelvinator. Those came from ad agencies.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they got heavily involved in packaging, design, making products look appealing on the shelf. and even early forms of public relations shaping the company's image.
So they were building the whole brand experience, not just the ads.
Exactly. And they really pushed this image of themselves as being both smart business people and public servants. They weren't just selling stuff, they were solving people's problems, making life better.
Helping people live the modern life.
Right. And they tied consumption directly to, like, national progress, even civilization itself. Someone called advertising an agency of civilization. Another said it was a sign of civilization because it showed people wanted more
A
things.
sign of civilization is wanting more stuff. That seems a bit thin.
It does today, maybe.
Hmm.
But their logic was sort of, well, one writer literally said that people in countries without advertising were either semi-civilized or savages because they had fewer desires.
Savages. Because they didn't want the latest gadget.
Apparently. The act of creating new wants through advertising was seen as the process of civilizing people. Giving them desires was lifting them up.
That is a truly unique definition of progress.
Yeah. And to make all this wanting and buying feel more, I don't know, respectable, especially maybe to the men holding the purse strings,
Yeah.
they used that business language again.
They did. They tapped into ideas from scientific management, efficiency, home economics fields that were seen as rational, maybe more masculine.
How did that play out?
Well, like the Hoover vacuum ads telling men to think about housework from her point of view. It framed buying the vacuum not just as helping out, but as a smart, efficient business investment for the home, like upgrading machinery in a factory.
Right. The home is the first factory, the housewife as the plant manager. It all links up.
Exactly. It made spending on household goods seem less frivolous and more like a sound business decision. As one source put it, calling Mrs. Consumer a plant manager was basically the highest compliment Mr. Advertiser could pay her. Okay, let's jump forward a bit again. Radio comes along. That must have shaken things up. Ads right in your ears, in your home.
Huge change. Huge. Suddenly, ad agencies weren't just writing copy and buying space in magazines. They were producing entire entertainment shows, soap operas, comedies, music programs. All sponsored, of course.
So they became content creators, basically.
Pretty much. But what's really interesting is, even with this super direct line into people's homes, a lot of advertisers still seem to look down on their audience.
Really? Even when they were listening in real time?
Yeah, it seems so. There are stories of ad execs kind of snickering about the public's taste in radio shows. They called popular programs corn, too simple, too sentimental.
Like, we have to make this cheesy stuff because that's what they like.
Exactly. There's a great quote from an executive about a hit show. Just terrible. Awful, he said, but then added, the people who buy toothpaste like it.
Wow. So a total disconnect between their own tastes and what they thought worked for the masses.
Definitely seems like it. Many of these ad men were, educated, urban, probably well off. They were physically and culturally distant from a lot of their listeners.
Yeah.
It made it easier to think of them as just a market, not individuals.
And maybe easier to hold on to some pretty condescending ideas.
I think so. You hear things like, the great mass has never had an idea. They saw the audience as this passive blob, easily influenced.
That sounds pretty cynical.
It can, yeah. They often contrasted the audience maybe imagined as a tired, bored, middle-aged man and woman whose lives are empty with themselves, the advertisers, who naturally saw their own lives as full and interesting. The consumer was definitely the other.
And even when they started doing things like polls or running contests to figure out what people liked, they still kind of stuck to these assumptions.
To a large extent, yes. There was this famous test. If the agency's office boy could understand the radio ad copy, then it was assumed the entire country would get it too.
The office boy test. That doesn't exactly scream deep audience understanding, does it?
Not really. It highlights that gap. And they started to see the products and the shows almost as symbols of the consumers. Like, the stuff people bought or listened to was who they were.
The brand becomes the person, in a way.
Kind of, yeah. Now, on the flip side, some did see potential in radio to, bring people together, create shared experiences.
Oh, so?
The idea was, if millions are listening to the same show at the same time, maybe it breaks down some social barriers, creates common ground, shared habits, shared tastes. And advertisers, well, they like that idea. It meant a bigger, more unified market for their stuff.
Okay, this all perfectly sets the stage for the Pepsodent story, doesn't it? Because that seems like a prime example of using advertising to create a massive habit.
It absolutely is. The timing was perfect. Around World War I, as we mentioned, Army dentists were shocked at how bad recruits' teeth were.
Right, widespread decay, a real problem.
Huge problem. It showed that regular brushing just wasn't common. So there was a genuine health need and also, frankly, a massive market opportunity.
Enter Claude Hopkins, the scientific advertising guy.
The very same. Hopkins was known for his focus on results, on testing, on finding what actually worked. He took on Pepsodent, which wasn't doing that well at the time.
So what was his scientific approach here?
He dove into dental research, and he found mentions of mucin plaques on teeth, that sticky coating.
Uh-huh.
He simplified that idea and rebranded it as the film, that slightly cloudy, sometimes yellowish layer you can feel.
The film. Okay, that sounds way more noticeable and maybe a bit grosser than mucin plaque.
Exactly. He gave people a simple, tangible problem they could recognize, something they might not even thought about before. He basically defined the enemy, this film.
Clever. So identify the problem, then offer the solution.
Precisely. And he didn't just sell Pepsodent as toothpaste, he sold it as a creator of beauty. The way to get rid of that cloudy yellow film and get a dazzling smile. The ads were brilliant.
What made them so effective?
Several things. First, that call to action. Just run your tongue across your teeth. You'll feel a film.
Oh, wow, that's interactive.
Totally. It makes you notice it right now. It turns a natural feeling into a cue, a daily reminder that the film is there and you need Pepsodent.
That's genius. What else?
He hammered the benefits, not just clean teeth, but beauty, charm, popularity, romance. A sparkling smile meant social success. He tapped into those deep desires.
So it wasn't about health as much as it was about looking good and fitting in.
That was definitely the main angle. And there was another key part, the toothpaste itself.
The formula.
Yeah. Pepsodent had ingredients like citric acid and mint oil. It gave this really noticeable, cool, tingling sensation after brushing.
Ah, so you felt it working.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It provided immediate sensory feedback, a little reward that reinforces the habit. Plus, he used kind of scientific language, mentioned dental authorities without naming them, to sound credible. And critically, he offered free samples.
The free 10-day trial, get people started.
Yep. Lower the barrier to entry, let them feel that tingle, start building the routine. And it worked like gangbusters.
Okay.
Demand exploded almost immediately. Within weeks, they couldn't keep up. Within a few years, Pepsodent was huge, internationally known.
Wow.
And the bigger picture, Hopkins and Pepsodent are credited with playing a massive role in making daily toothbrushing a widespread habit in America. Within about 5 years, things started changing dramatically. A decade after the campaign started, polls showed over half the population brushed regularly.
From almost no one to over half the country in a decade. That's incredible, just from advertising.
Well, the advertising was the catalyst. It created the desire, the routine, the social pressure. It really shows the power of hitting the right psychological triggers.
And did competitors just copy Pepsodent?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone started talking about bright smiles, fresh breath, getting rid of problems. Listerine invented halitosis. Life Buoy soap fought BO. Pepsodent basically showed them the playbook. Identify a social anxiety, promise a cosmetic solution, provide a sensory cue. It fueled the whole personal hygiene market.
It's amazing. And you mentioned the contrast with the WWII.
Yeah, it's striking. By World War II, the military apparently didn't have the same massive dental problems among recruits as they did in WWI. Brushing had become normal.
A testament to the power of habit creation, largely driven by Pepsodent's campaign. Incredible.
It really is.
Now, Hopkins wasn't just lucky. He had this whole philosophy, right? Scientific advertising. What were the main ideas behind that?
Yeah, he really tried to systematize it.
Yeah.
His big thing was treating advertising like salesmanship, one-on-one. It had to pay for itself.
ROI, basically, return on investment.
Exactly. He loved things like coupons or samples because you could directly track how many sales an ad generated. No guesswork. Measure everything.
Data-driven before data was cool?
Pretty much. He also stressed understanding psychology, what makes people tick. Curiosity, self-interests, those were big ones for him. People buy things to make themselves feel good, fundamentally. And he insisted on knowing your product inside out, knowing your customer, and then testing. Test headlines, test offers, test everything. See what actually pulls results. Mail order ads were his favorite testing ground because you got clear winners and losers fast.
So constant experimentation and learning.
Right. He wasn't big on just being clever or artistic for its own sake. Headlines needed to grab the right people, the potential buyers. Art should help sell, not just look nice. It was all very pragmatic, very focused on the sale. Test, measure, learn, adapt. Don't assume you know best.
Makes a lot of sense. Those principles still feel relevant today, don't they?
Absolutely. Understanding your audience, testing your messages, focusing on results that's still core to good marketing.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, what are the big takeaways from this journey into the soapy, minty past of toothbrushing?
Well, first, I think it's undeniable that advertisers in that 1890, 1930 period had a huge hand in shaping everyday habits. And their views of the consumers they were targeting, especially women, were complicated and sometimes pretty contradictory.
Yeah, that paradox was really striking.
Second, the Pepsodent story is just a classic case study. It shows how you can build a massive, lasting habit by understanding psychology, finding the right hook that film, and using smart, tested advertising tactics like the samples and the sensory reward.
Mm.
And third, Claude Hopkins' scientific advertising ideas focusing on measurable results, testing, understanding human nature, really did lay some important groundwork for how marketing works even now.
And bringing it back to our "but why though" question, it's just fascinating to peel back the layers on something as simple as brushing your teeth and find this whole history of advertising, social change, and psychological nudges behind it. It wasn't inevitable, it was actively constructed.
It really was. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Think about a habit you have now. Maybe it's checking your phone first thing. Maybe it's a specific brand you always buy. What forces might have shaped that habit? Advertising you've seen. Social norms. The design of the app or product itself. What little things today might be building the big habits of tomorrow? And thinking about Pepsodent, that mix of selling beauty and maybe some actual benefit, how does that balance look in the habits being pushed on us today? Something to brush up against in your mind.